Well, good morning to some and good afternoon to others. Today is January 11th, 2023, already 11 days into the new year. Welcome to the new year. My name is Dr. Alicia Mutri. I am the co-director for the Region 10 Wisconsin, Minnesota Comprehensive Center. Today, you are participating in a webinar entitled Building and Learning from Grow Your Own, Educator Initiatives in Rural Communities. What's the mission of Region 10 Comprehensive Center? We're really thinking about improving the academic achievement for elementary and secondary school students in two states region by advancing the use of evidence-based practices, thinking of Wisconsin and Minnesota. The Region 10 has partner organizations. You'll see the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the WEC Center, the University of Minnesota, Cary, and then Educational Analytics, EA. Those are the three partner organizations. If you would at this time, take the moment to follow us. Please follow us on LinkedIn. You should be able to see the link in the chat in just a minute, if it hasn't already been placed in. But if you would click the link to follow us on LinkedIn, that would be amazing. We would really appreciate that. The Wisconsin Minnesota Comprehensive Center, again, Region 10. You have hosts and moderators for today. First of all, your moderator, Bree Chapa. First of all, just like to thank her for all the work that she's putting in to get us going and to get everything organized. Thank you so much for what's happening behind the scenes. Sometimes the stuff that happens behind the scenes is just as important as the stuff that happens in front of the scene. So Bree is a part of the WEC Center staff. And then we have Brad Carl, which you'll hear from him just a little bit later as well, the co-director of WEC, and then also part of Region 10 Comprehensive Center. And then Alyssa Parr, which is a part of Cary, Minnesota Region 10 staff as well. And so with that said, Alyssa and Brad are going to be our hosts, but I'd like to, at this moment, turn it over to Alyssa to take us further.
Thank you very much, Alicia. So for our agenda today, we're going to talk about a few intended takeaways that we have for today. We'll do some introductions and talk about the different means of attendee engagement. Then we'll provide some background and context on this topic. We'll facilitate a discussion amongst our panelists. We have a couple discussants here with us today that will share their reflections, and then we'll engage in some Q&A with the audience. Thank you all for joining us today.
Okay, I will, Brad Carl with the Region 10 Comprehensive Center and UW-Madison. This section of our presentation, we're going to frame for you a few intended takeaways from today's webinar. We'll do some introductions of our panelists and discussion, panelists and moderators, and we will also give you a few guidelines for attendees in terms of how to engage in the presentation and share your comments and questions. So I will pass back to Alyssa now for our intended takeaways.
Next slide. Thank you. So our intended takeaways are, these are essentially the 3 points that we hope you'll take away from the webinar today. First, understand different types of rural grow your own programs as one strategy for addressing educator shortages. 2, learn of 2 examples, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin, of rural grow your own initiatives. And then 3, recognize how grow your own initiatives offer a promising opportunity for meeting educator workforce needs. And with that, I think I'll pass it back to Brad.
Okay, I am pleased and honored to welcome our panelists. We have 3 panelists and 2 discussants who I will introduce very briefly right here, and then we will hear from them more shortly. Our first panelist is Liz Dostal, who is the principal for Wisconsin Heights Middle and High School in the Wisconsin Heights School District, a small rural district located outside of Madison here in south central Wisconsin. So welcome, Liz, and thank you for your time. Our second panelist is Christine Quisley, who is professor at Southwest Minnesota State University. She has partnered with Minnesota West Community College and a rural district in southwestern Minnesota, Worthington, on a Grow Your Own initiative, which we will learn more about shortly. Thank you, Christine, for joining us. Oops. Jordan Sins is the superintendent of the Wisconsin Heights School District. He and Liz will be talking about their Grow Your Own initiative, which is called Grow. And so thank you, Jordan, for joining us. So those are our three panelists. And then we're very pleased to have two esteemed discussants joining us and sharing their expertise and views here. They are the two leaders of our state's respective rural education advocacy organizations. So first, big welcome to Jeff Eide, who is the director of the Wisconsin Rural Schools Alliance, or WRSA. And also welcome to Bob Indahar, who is the director of the Minnesota Rural Education Association. So those are our panelists and our discussants for today's conversation. We'll pass over to Bree now to give us some ground rules for attendee engagement.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to share a little bit about how you can share out your thoughts and ideas and questions with us. So we have two ways we are supporting attendee engagement at today's webinar. The first, of course, is our Q&A spot. Throughout the webinar, this question and answer option will be available for you to submit your questions. We do have it enabled to allow anonymous submissions. We also have it enabled so that you can upvote other questions that you would like a response to. So feel free to click that thumbs up button. And then also, we will be providing a link to a survey where we would love some feedback from you on this webinar. I will post a link to that survey shortly, and I will also post a link later in the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Bree. Okay, so next we are just spend a couple of minutes here giving just a little bit of background and context for our discussion today about Grow Your Own initiatives in rural districts. So no big news flash here. There is widespread concern and increasing publicity around educator shortages that are confronting schools all across the country. There is some evidence that shortages of educators are particularly urgent in rural schools. And those of you who work in and with rural schools are saying, of course, this is nothing new. This was already a challenge even before the pandemic and for many rural districts to attract and retain high quality staff. So in some sense, we're seeing here the concern around educator shortages is something that rural schools have been facing for quite some time. So as there are a variety of policy solutions that are being attempted at a state level, at a local level, all around the country, and certainly that's the case here in our two states, Minnesota and Wisconsin. One variety of a strategy for addressing educator shortages and diversifying the educator workforce is what has become known as Grow Your Own programs, or GYO programs. There's a fairly limited but increasingly promising base of evidence that is being marshaled that suggests that homegrown educators are more likely to stay once they've been hired in a district, and they also bring a deep knowledge of local context. So there's research that says most educators eventually land close within 50 miles or so of where they grew up. And so they're returning home in some sense, and they bring with them a deep knowledge of what the local context and knowledge of their local communities are. So there is some good research behind Grow Your Own programs in general as a strategy for both these two related problems of meeting educator workforce needs and diversifying the educator workforce. So in a bit of an oversimplified way, we can think of, there's some research that has suggested that Grow Your Own programs can be divided into at least two categories. One category focuses on current adults who are in some cases already working or have recently worked in school systems. So these would be things like aides and paraprofessionals. And so there is a set of Grow Your Own initiatives that focuses on this group and attempts, for example, to get aides and paraprofessionals fully licensed so that they can be classroom teachers and guidance counselors and social workers and that kind of thing. So that's one category. And then there's a second category of Grow Your Own initiatives that has sometimes been called upstream Grow Your Own initiatives. And this is referring to initiatives that are looking further upstream. So targeting current high school students, in some cases, even middle school students, through programs like Educators Rising, and or we'll hear about in the case of the GROW initiative that Wisconsin Heights is part of. They're actively engaging with recent graduates of their districts who may be in some cases enrolled in educator prep programs. So again, there are lots of different varieties of within both of these categories, but in some ways it's helpful to kind of frame this and say that Grow Your Own initiatives have at least these two main categories. Okay, so one other bit of a context here would be that we partnered, the WCER partnered with WRSA, the Wisconsin Rural Schools Alliance this past fall, did a superintendent survey in rural districts to ask them about, not just about the extent of the problem. We actually didn't focus that much on the extent of the problem because we wanted this data collection to really be focused more on solutions and on what rural districts are doing. And so we're very pleased. We had a response rate of over 70%. So that's more than 200 responses among our little over 300 rural districts in the state, and then taking out some that we were not able to reach. But very high level takeaways here that I'll highlight three of them here. Obviously, no surprise here that the data we collected affirmed that educator shortages are a very serious issue for Wisconsin rural districts. They also affirmed that Grow Your Own programs are a very popular strategy, and there are lots of interesting and innovative work being done in this space among rural districts in Wisconsin. And then this one is maybe not surprising, but certainly helps frame some of the challenge going forward, is that there were we learned from our rural superintendent survey that very few districts are collecting data on either the implementation or the effectiveness of the Grow Your Own programs that they're implementing, or for that matter, really collecting much data or doing any evaluation work on the other strategies outside of Grow Your Own initiatives. So a bit of good news here in that, again, there's a lot of work being done, and then certainly some room for growth here and an opportunity in the sense that not a lot of data being collected to help us understand what's working well in which context, for which reasons, and how can we sustain and scale up programs that are promising. So with that in mind, we're going to turn next to our panelists. And so what I'm going to do with this section of the presentation is I have a set of questions that I will tee up for each of our panelists. So what we'll do is we'll take turns. Our Wisconsin and our Minnesota panelists will take turns responding to a set of questions that I will ask for them. And so we'll go from one state to the other, and we'll hear from each of our panelists on both sets of panelists on each of the questions. And then after that, we will turn to have our discussants share some reflections. So our first question, let's see, and Jeff, if you don't mind, maybe we'll start with you on this one. Our first question is basically just a background question. If you would, please tell us briefly about your initiative, your group, your consortium. Sorry, I said Jeff, I meant Liz. Liz, if you could start with this one. Please tell us briefly about your group or your consortium. Who are the partners? When was it formed? What was the primary impetus? What are some of the main features? How is the program funded? That's a lot. I'll leave it up to you to respond to that, if you would, please. Thank you.
And actually, I'm going to have Jordan answer that question because I think he has a better perspective on that.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Liz. Jordan Sims, District Administrator, Wisconsin Heights. So to the questions that Brad posed, first off, our consortium, our GROW group, was formed late in 2021 and into early 2022. The districts that we've partnered with, we had some previous working relationship. There's proximity is certainly a part of it as well. But we identified 4 districts that we have a number of similarities with. So those districts, Sauk Prairie, which is a neighboring district, we share a border. And for context, Sauk Prairie has around 2,700 students in their district. Lodi, which is right next to Sauk Prairie as well, has about 1,500. And then Cambridge, which is a member of our athletic conference, which geographically is about 45 to 50 minutes away from the rest of the districts, has over 900 students. And then Wisconsin Heights has about 750 students. At the same time, we also formed a partnership with UW-Whitewater to address the ability to get our high school students School of Education college credits while they were still in high school. So the consortium really formed around the shared goal of creating a grow your own program. We know what the research is, we know what our experience is, and we wanted to find the ability or make the ability to get students to come back to our districts. The research shows that rural students tend to come back and stay in rural districts. And we wanted to invest in our students and in the future of our districts, because we know that strong school districts in rural communities are really the lifeblood of those communities in many cases. We also have found ways to provide experiences through the consortium, through the grant, and highlight the opportunities for students to get work experiences, whether it's in like an educational assistant setting or as kind of teachers in training while they're still in high school. And then, as I mentioned before, we've partnered with UW-Whitewater to get our students access to School of Education coursework while they're still in high school. Key component of our program is tiered scholarships for students from one of the 4 GROW districts. So there's 4 tiers basically, or 4 levels of scholarships. We do have, or we will be offering $1,000 scholarships for students that are entering into their freshman year of college with the intent of majoring in education. $2,000 scholarships for students that are entering into their sophomore year, once again with the intent of entering into a school of ed, and then $10,000 scholarships for both juniors and seniors from GROW schools who are now admitted into School of Education programs at their respective college. So for students, the possibility exists that through this GROW grant and through our partnership consortium, they could get up to $23,000 in scholarship support. And then in return for that scholarship support, those students basically sign a contract with the consortium saying that they will come back if offered a position in one of the districts and work at least 3 years in any one of the 4 consortium districts. When you're a small district, you can't guarantee that you're going to have openings in every licensure area every year. So we felt like that was part of the power of the consortium, was that between the 4 districts, we probably would have an opening in just about most licensure areas. But if we did not, students would only be required to pay back that scholarship money if they declined a job offer from one of the member districts in the consortium. Another way that we have funded this, because obviously money makes the world go around, we successfully applied for and received a $264,000 innovation grant through the Department of Workforce Development. And then the districts have committed to contributing $23,750 in each of the next 2 years, each of the districts, for a total of $190,000. So we view that as our seed money with the DWD and then our local dollars to help get this program started. And we're confident we're going to see success moving forward. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate the overview. Let's see, Christine, can I turn to you next for an overview of the Minnesota initiative?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. I'm Christine Quisley. I'm an assistant professor with Southwest Minnesota State University. And one of my main focuses at the university is working with the Southwest Teacher Preparation Partnership Program. It is a collaborative with Worthington School District out of Worthington, Minnesota, Minnesota West Community and Technical College out of Worthington, Minnesota, and then us at SMSU. And how it begins is there's an option. I was taking some notes. It would meet both the current adults, as Brad had alluded to earlier, as well as an upstream focus, because we work with students who maybe are changing careers. So they're coming back, maybe they already have a degree and they're going to now focus in education. So they take some classes at Minnesota West and get their a few of their foundation. We have about 5 classes we offer through Minnesota West in conjunction with them that transfer directly to SMSU. And then, or students can start and take a couple introductory to education, an introductory to special education, et cetera, while in high school and do their field experiences and then work that way. And then we at SMSU, I provide our program focuses mainly on elementary education and teaching English as an additional language. Those are our 2 main focuses currently. And I, as a former current, however you want to phrase it, elementary education licensure, offer the classes in Worthington at the community college so that our candidates, many, if you're not familiar with Worthington as a community, it is 80% of diversity. So we have a large population where that, for whatever reason, cannot travel the 65 miles up the highway to SMSU. And so we are providing a mixture of blended classes and in-person classes for their final 3 and 4 year of their track to that license. We are funded through a multitude of grants. I am not on that particular. We are a group of stakeholders from the community school district, the Minnesota West, and SMSU. And I really serve as the hub and kind of work between everybody, as well as deliver the classes in person. But as I said, we have a multitude of grants. Some come from the SWIFT Foundation, the Southwest Teacher Initiative Foundation. We have grants from there. We have Grow Your Own grants. We have a multitude of grants, but I cannot, like Jordan, give you the exact dollar amount for personal reasons. As I am the professor of record, I kind of stay out of what students get what amount of dollars, just to keep that on a fair playing field, if you will. With that, Brad, what else haven't I answered for you?
That's a good overview, I think. And we have, as you know, in the questions that are upcoming, you'll have a chance to elaborate on some of the specifics. So I think that's good for now. I will pivot to the second question. And by the way, one thing, important piece of information I should have shared at the beginning was that obviously there are lots of interesting and successful grow your own programs that are being attempted in our 2 states. By focusing on these 2, we're by no means suggesting these are the only 2 or these are the most successful. We obviously just had to make some decisions about what we had time to highlight in this webinar. But just want to acknowledge all of the good work that's being done by partners other than the ones that are featured in today's webinar. So, okay, with that, let me pivot to our second question, which is pretty straightforward. Tell us about what's worked well so far in your work. So, Jordan, Liz, I guess I'm taking a guess. Liz is going to handle this one. Very
You
good.
have guessed correctly.
All right, take it away.
I would say there are several items that have been successful so far. We started our scholarship program with the largest scholarship amount, the $10,000 award. And we were able to award $10,000 to 5 separate candidates. This was the right short-term goal because it allowed us to test the pool of candidates, and it reinforced that the award amount was on target. We looked at tuition for University of Wisconsin and decided that the best spot or niche for our largest scholarship would be $10,000 because that would cover tuition for 2 semesters at a UW school. And it was the right amount. We had 62 applicants from across the state of Wisconsin apply. Obviously, not all of those members or applications were alumni, but we did have alumni apply also. So we had a great pool to review. The other piece that I think is pivotal is that we had the commitment from the member districts to contribute monies during the grant cycle, which was key to addressing the continuation after the grant funding ends. Now that's always part of the grant application is how are you going to continue this post-grant funding? But I think it also ensures that the member districts have a long-term vision for how this is going to work and unfold. And we know that the teacher shortage is unlikely to ease within the next 5 years. So it gives us time to take that seed money that was provided us and start making an impact immediately, but then be able to continue that impact over time. It also allowed our partner districts to see the candidates who will be available in spring 23 coming on the job market. While we only awarded 5 applicants, we were able to look at applicants who are anticipating student teaching either this fall or now in this coming spring semester. And so that gave us an opportunity to see the quality of the candidate coming out. This is very helpful. We were only awarding 5 scholarships, so there might be certification areas where we know we need, or one of the districts needs a candidate, but we couldn't award, but at least they have a sense of who's going to be in the pool. The other thing that has really worked well is we have been leveraging as much of the technology that we could, particularly Qualtrics and Zoom, and ways that we can virtually connect not only with our students, but with the universities. So we sent a recruitment email out to all the university schools of ed, asking for their support in disseminating this scholarship. And that was key. Not only did I conduct a lot of Zoom meetings with School of Ed, clinical placement folks, we just were able to promote the program and connect with a lot of people across the state, and have a great turnout for applications. So I thought that was important. Those things have really worked well for us. And I can see how once we get through this initial year, we're going to have some solid footing underneath us.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Christine, back to you. Want to tell us a little bit about what's worked well with your program so far?
Absolutely. So I think for us, the biggest thing that is our strength is we are reaching and we are finding, as I alluded to earlier, Worthington community is 80% diversity. So, however, within the school district, within the public school district itself, it's a traditional rural Caucasian, we don't have many teachers of diversity. We have some, but not a lot. And those candidates of diversity really are in the para roles or what have you. And we have an influx of, in a positive way, of these paras or community members who maybe have a different degree, who have heard about our program, who say, you know what, I've always wanted to be a teacher. However, I didn't have the funding. I didn't know how to go about it. I, am new to the area, to country, what have you. This is great. There's somebody there to help me. And when we have our students, we have our first round of candidates who are student teaching currently. And what I hear time and time again from, it's a small group, a small but mighty group of 4, all young ladies, but 2 of them are candidates of diverse, and they often say, I have students come up to me, and they're in elementary and TESOL, teaching English as additional language. I have students who come up to me and say, you look just like my mom, and there's nobody here that looks like my mom, and both candidates speak multiple languages, so they are able to address and meet the needs of the students in the classroom in real time, which is huge. As we know, if a student doesn't identify with a teacher and feel the warmth of a teacher, the connection with the teacher, that student isn't going to learn from the teacher. And so for us, and for me, I think that's one of our great strengths, is we are boots on the ground, if you will, meeting those needs for our elementary, TESOL population right now. So.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we heard a little bit about where we've been so far. We heard a little bit about an overview of each of the initiatives, and the last question was about what's working well. So as you might guess, now my next question is going to be, tell us about where some of the challenges and the landmines and where those have come up and how you've addressed those. So let's see. I don't know, Jordan or Liz, I'll put this one back to you. Liz, okay.
Okay. I would say on the backside of the grant and of the program is making sure that you have all your financials aligned was a challenge. In Wisconsin, we have the WUFAR codes, and we were required to add different codes, and there was more time, additional time required than we had anticipated in setting up the fiscal side of the grant. And a lot of just first year challenges that you have when you're creating a new program. You're creating a lot of documents and timelines, rubrics, a lot of communication through email, short Zoom meetings just to address quick challenges. Some of those have been, it just took a little more time than what we had anticipated. But once those things are built, we're kind of building the plane as we fly, to use the cliche. And so once those are built, I think it's going to be a one-time activity or an easily refined document or process over time. And that makes like the front end work manageable, I believe. I would say the main challenges too is that, if the need is there for our students who are in college right now, the financial need is there, and quality work placements and student teaching placements, and also just the idea of like that they're going to get an interview at one of our 4 districts has been a huge boon to these students, I believe. I wish that we just could have reached more kids or more students. I shouldn't say kids because they're adults, but more candidates within the field, but we had to start small. And I think by starting small, we're gonna have great results. Other than that, I think that the outer facing piece, that PR piece, is always going to demand more of you. And the social media piece is a big part of that.
All right, thank you, Liz. Christine, back to you. You want to tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you've encountered so far?
Yeah, very similar to what Liz alluded to. We're working between the public school district, the community college, and then us at the university. And so even though we have an abundance of funds, getting those funds into the hands of the students is a paperwork nightmare. Because you have some that are paras and then they're not paras, and then so they take time off of work. So how do we compensate their missed time from work, which we wrote a grant for, and we got that grant, we received that grant, but now we have to go through the HR departments, and and it's not just one HR department, it's 3. And so everybody might do their bookworking slightly different. And so that creates some hiccups along the way. Another issue that it's a positive, but yet it comes in maybe as a negative, is I have a revolving door of candidates who come through the office that I'm not currently in, but that I hold at Minnesota West. And they're like, I heard that we could do a teaching degree. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, well, I want to be a physical education teacher. I'm like, great. However, this program doesn't allude to that, and so then I connect them with other programs. And so I would say if we have 10 candidates come through my door, unfortunately, we can only assist because that's where we're at. Like was earlier mentioned, starting small. We only can focus on elementary ed and TESOL at this time, even though there is a great need, we know, and I'm a math nerd, in high school mathematics and high school science and everywhere. However, that's one of the hangups. And then just our numbers are ebb and flow. When we're only, like I said, have our first cohort going through this program, I was hired 3 years ago to be ready for, right in the middle of COVID, to be ready for our upcoming students who are now out, candidates who are out student teaching. We have students who take the 2 classes at the high school at Worthington, and then they transfer to Minnesota West, but along the way they decide, you know what, I really don't think I want to be a teacher, or they decide, maybe, my friend is going over to a different university, I think I'll transfer over there. So at times our numbers drop. And so I love that what Jordan alluded to earlier about so I'm learning right along with everybody else today. I'm taking notes of, okay, let's do the breakdown, the scholarship incentives of 1,000, because we currently, it's a case by case, which can be a paperwork nightmare, and what qualifies, what doesn't qualify, who does, who doesn't. Those are the hiccups. So I really would say, like Liz did, we're building the plane in flight. Even though we've been at it for over 5+ years, we just only have that wing done so far. So we're kind of flying at a tilt. So I have bad dad humor. Sorry, that's what I got. So, all right, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Christine. Okay, so I've gone over the some of what's working well, some of the challenges. Next question is asking you to look forward a little bit and say, where do you see your initiative and your Grow Your Own initiative going in the future? So Liz or Jordan, take it away.
This is my final one. I promise you get Jordan back after this. I would say that the model that we are creating is going to be able to be replicated. Ideally, there would be dollars allocated from our state, either legislature, which in Wisconsin could be a challenge, DPI, to fund startup with a financial commitment being made by those districts that participate, so that it eventually would be self-funded, kind of the same model that we followed. You get a grant allocation for 3 years, and in that 3 years you self-fund so that you can continue the program going forward. And I think too is the other thing that hopefully will happen in the future is this model and the ongoing teacher shortage also sparked some changes around student teaching. As a profession, I think we've had it, I don't want to say easy, but we've been lucky that we've not had to pay for internships or have students who are finishing their bachelor's degree. When they come to us to student teach, they're paying tuition. They student teach for free. Yes, we have to commit staff time and support to them, but we're not paying them. And at that same time, the message they're receiving is that you can't work an outside job when you're student teaching. Well, financially, I don't know if that's a viable option anymore. And the financial realities that our college students experience are much different than what many of us experienced when we went through our undergraduate work. So I think we do have to start having these conversations about, should student teaching remain an unpaid placement? If it's going to be paid, how is that funded? And what can we do to make sure that we're providing the best possible placements for our student teachers, so that when they are done with their student teaching experience, they are not only ready to hit the ground running, but they've gained the confidence and the insight and the experience that they need to be a high quality teacher for any district in our state.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. Christine, you want to take this one next? Where do you see your work, your initiative going in the future?
Our work is still growing. So we're working at, just like Liz said, we're able to provide financial stability so students can afford to do their student teaching, but that's not going to be relevant. Relevance is probably the wrong word, but we need the financial stability to help pay our student teachers if we're going to see our opportunities grow. What we need in our program is we need to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all our candidates, that both not just financially, but also we've got many who, not many, but half of ours are TESOL candidates, and 2 of them in particular are new to the United States. And so they right along are learning English as an additional language, and connect with their students. So providing them with support. And so it's putting that into our basket as well. I think our program could grow if we continue to have it go the full gamut of all three partnerships. And that's where our struggle is. In fact, we're meeting in the next month to really look at that data, as was alluded to earlier about, hey, there's no data with GMOs if it's working. That's part of, now that we've been going for 3 years, we're diving into our data. Is this working? How well is it working? Where are our hangups? And so based on those, that's when we will write our goals for the future. Of course, we want this to continue as best it can. However, we need to make sure that this is not a hindrance for students. And something I probably should have mentioned on the previous question is, one of the hangups that we're having is, we wrote the grants for a year-long student teaching residency model, so that those candidates who are working, maybe as a para professional, could do half their day as a para and then half their day student teaching, and then they would meet the Minnesota Pellsby requirements. However, that's looking at, it's becoming more of a hang up. And so really refocusing, okay, how can we do that better? And so that's where our next steps and where we're going to is, okay, does it need to be a year-long student teaching, or could it be a traditional semester of student teaching and revamping that? So that's where we're going next to.
Excellent. Thank you, Christine. So for the next question, in the context and background section, I suggested that there's a growing proliferation of grow your own programs of different kinds. Again, some focused on current adults, some focused on the more of the upstream variety on more recent graduates, or in some cases, high school and middle school students. So my next question is, given what's emerging in terms of grow your own initiatives in particular, I'm wondering if each of our panelists can say a little bit about what is unique about doing this in a rural context. So there are some challenges and benefits that probably encompass grow your own initiatives in general, but I think it's probably fair to say that there are some unique things about doing this in a rural context. And unique, I mean unique in a good way, maybe unique in a challenging way. But so my next question is, can you please speak to a little bit to what's unique about doing a grow your own program in a rural context? So let's see, I guess, Jordan, this one's for you.
We had to keep you on your toes, Brad, so good job. You're passing the test. Yeah, so relative to rural school districts, I mean, one of the things, particularly, I can speak for the state of Wisconsin because that's what I know, is rural districts are declining in enrollment. And because we're declining in student enrollment, we're also declining in funding because our funding is tied to students. And therefore, many rural districts are seeing more and more challenges with budgets because of their declining enrollment status. So I think one thing for us on the front end, and even as we were trying to form partnerships with neighboring districts, and then even thinking about our own context, is acknowledging the fact that there is some tension in investing in future employees and in people that may not step through your door for 3, 4, potentially 5 years to actually work, versus the present reality that your staff and your community sees right now. Why aren't you investing in us? Why aren't you investing in materials and programs for 2022? You're investing in someone that may not step through this door until 2025. So I think just being upfront about that and acknowledging the fact that there could be some tension, and that I think just goes back to kind of the leadership of your consortium or your district, your school board, whatever it may be, and being able to articulate the vision of why this is important. And I think why this is important is a lot of rural communities, once again, in Wisconsin, are struggling to remain vibrant. Population is dropping, student population is dropping, and kind of the trend right now is suburban and going to suburban areas. So it's that vicious cycle of, if we don't invest in our rural communities and our rural schools to make them as strong as possible, at what point do we kind of slow down the cycle and remain vibrant and keep those communities alive and well? One of the things that emerged as I was working to try to complete my dissertation a couple of years ago, and actually worked with Brad on some of the research and his support through UW-Madison was the fact that in the state of Wisconsin, the 4 classifications, rural, towns, suburban, and urban, the research was relatively clear that rural schools and then actually urban schools as well are struggling to retain educators at a much higher level than both towns and then suburban communities. So this issue is more acute, and the research supports the fact that it's more acute in rural communities. So as you're working to form partnerships, as you're working to get dollars, whether it's local or state or grant dollars, I do think that has to be a part of your narrative. And there's information to support it. That's not just you forming a hypothesis. No, there's data to support that. The other part, though, that research shows is that students who grew up in towns in rural communities are more likely to be interested in coming back to rural communities, and more frequently they stay in rural communities. So by forming these partnerships and by offering these grants and these incentives, if we can get those students back in our communities, then our chance for success and the likelihood that we're not the farm system for suburban and urban areas where students come to us, work for a couple of years, and then move on to bigger and better things. If it's rural students that we're bringing in, then our chances of holding on to them are better as well. And Liz talked about the financial incentives of this. Rural communities tend to pay a little bit less, once again, than suburban and urban areas. We don't have the same financial resources. So if we can financially incentivize as rural communities, getting people there who then enjoy the quality of life, who maybe enjoy the slower pace, lower cost of living, it just seems to make sense that getting them there is the crucial component. And we not only want to get people here, but we want to try to get our best and our brightest. We don't just want to attract people that feel like they have no other options. And I'm not trying to be disparaging towards any future candidate in education, but we know that to be a good teacher and to have strong communities and school districts, we need some of our best and brightest to be a part of that. And then one final thing relative to just this narrative and this overall, rural theme is I was doing a focus group prior to writing my dissertation, and I was interviewing a group of superintendents from north central Wisconsin. And one of the superintendents told a story and just gave an example that to me should be powerful for all of us as educators and people that care about rural communities. And he just explained, as he called it, kind of the vicious cycle that kids go through their educational system, and the majority of the kids that end up back in the system and back in that community were students that had bad experiences with school, and they felt like they really didn't have many other options to go anywhere else. So then they end up back in the community, but then the narrative around the local rural school kind of perpetuates itself. And it's like, well, that's not a great place to be. That's not a great district. And it just continues to kind of snowball and build on itself. So to me, rural schools, rural communities kind of need to take that seriously and try to do something different to kind of turn that narrative upside down and to have people understand that our rural communities can be strong, our rural schools can be strong, and investing in our people and trying to bring people back with degrees and who are interested in education and helping students is a crucial part of making those communities strong.
Excellent. Thank you, Jordan. Christine, you want to take this one? Again, just to refresh, what's unique about a grow your own program in a rural context as opposed to some other contexts?
Well, I think Jordan really captured all of it. I mean, even though we're in a different state, it all applies. Out here in, southwestern Minnesota, where we're at, Worthington is one of the larger communities in this area of about 13,000. However, we have many smaller, the kind of communities I'm from, of 2,000 or less, rural communities where they're just as big of a teacher shortage as everybody else. And so one of the things that hang up that that's unique, I'm looking at my question here, unique was we have trouble with transportation. We're small enough, we don't have the Ubers or or whatever. So if we have a candidate who does not live close to campus or close to one of the, Worthington has 2 elementary schools, a middle school and a high school. And if you're not close to the Worthington Community and Technical College or the districts, that can be a hang up. How do I get to class? How do I get to the school district? That type of thing. So we're working that's something that was not on our radar to think about, of how do we get our teacher candidates to their field placements. But on a positive note, we're small enough, everybody knows everybody. So it's like, oh, I can give you a ride. Oh, I'll pick you up. This person is going that direction. We've got another teacher who lives not far from you. Maybe you guys could carpool, or not carpool, but they could pick you up and work something out, and we help in that way. One of the things we really need to do with this program moving forward is looking at expanding it beyond, if it's going to keep being successful, beyond the Worthington School District. It is currently only with the Worthington School District. And like I mentioned, we have many 7 miles up the road communities that also could benefit from this program. And so I think that's one of the ways we could expand that's unique to us in the rural Southwest Minnesota. We are not, if you remember Little House on the Prairie, that's Walnut Grove is right up the road. And so literally up the road. And what's unique is we are pulling candidates in who go, oh, this community doesn't look like Little House on the Prairie. No, it doesn't. Welcome to our world. We're glad you're here. Let's get you in our program. Let's get you going, because our students, our K-12 students, need people, of diversity, and that's really what we want for all students, all candidates. But our Midwest is not Little House on the Prairie anymore, and so we need to meet those needs. And that's what's becoming even more of a push for us and across the state, as Bob probably could allude, greater Minnesota, there's a lot more diversity than, everybody thinks of Minnesota as diversity, Minneapolis, St. Paul, etc. Our whole state is growing in diversity. And so to meet the needs of our students, our young students, and helping grow programs like this where we can have candidates who they can identify with and learn from, and who are passionate, teachers who are passionate about providing those needs. And just like Jordan said, though, we want high quality teachers, and that's on us, is to keep pursuing and keep putting in place, not a high bar, but a wealth of knowledge to help our candidates be as strong as they can be. Okay, so I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
All right, thanks, Christine. Okay, so for our last question for each of for our panelists would be, one of our goals, as we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, was to offer up these 2 examples as something to learn from, examples of people who have done some of this work and have learned a few things that you've heard about in their remarks. So I'll tee up this last question, which is probably has emerged somewhat. And so maybe this is a little bit of a summary of some things you've previously said, but what advice would you have for other folks who may be in rural districts or in other contexts, working with rural districts that were thinking about doing a grow your own program? Any advice you have for them about, what to do, what to think about ahead of time? That's the question. What advice do you have for others that are thinking about doing this? So let's see, Liz or Jordan, is this one yours again?
Yes, it is. Thank you. I think the first thing, and perhaps most important for people to understand, and I doubt you'd be on this webinar if you weren't at least close to this point, but we were lucky for years, for decades, that we had a relatively large and plentiful pool of candidates. We would post a position, we'd get in some cases, hundreds of applications. We could be very selective, we could sort, and we would have no trouble in filling our positions. Those times have changed. And one thing that we try to pride ourselves on in our small rural district is we try to solve problems and we try to have vision to make things better, rather than, as we sometimes joke, like hope is not a strategy. So in this case, hoping that this problem is going to get better, to me, does not align with having vision and with trying to solve the problem. And while there's a lot of options out there, we felt strongly that creating this Grow Your Own program was one way that we could try to do something that would be better for the profession and better for kids, which is ultimately what we're about. To support that notion, the private sector has been involved in talent acquisition, bringing talent in, compensating people, yes, for internships and other work for decades. So the thought that we would do something like this when you're trying to get support of school boards and community members and other people, while it's new to us, it's certainly not new to the working world. So hopefully, as you're trying to start a program like this, you can make some of those comparisons. And I fully recognize that public education is much different than the private sector as well. But in this case, let's utilize that connection to build upon that strength. For us, it's crucial to get creative, utilize partnerships that you already have. We would not be able to do this on our own, either financially, nor would we have enough positions conceivably to hire these teachers. But when we pair up with 3 other districts, there's strength in numbers. So leverage whatever partnerships that you can and find ways to fund these programs. And then finally, the last thing, and this may not be even related to a Grow Your Own program, it's more of a professional statement. I don't know how many times in the course of my career I've had colleagues or people say, like, I told my own kids that they shouldn't go into education or they shouldn't be teachers. That's a message that I really struggle with. And if we wonder why we're struggling to attract people to our profession, sometimes we don't even speak very highly of our own profession. So I really want to encourage people to feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, because teachers are incredibly important and we need to have pride in the work that we do. And we need to treat ourselves and treat our profession the way it should be, because I do think some of that messaging is having an impact, and that's why we are struggling as well. So I think hopefully that's something that we can all try to be a little bit better at moving forward as well.
All right, thank you, Jordan. Christine, you want to take this one, advice for others who are seeking to form some kind of a rural Grow Your Own program?
Absolutely. Teaching is the profession that matters most. It affects every child, and every child is going to grow into be somebody who influences someone else. So to piggyback on what Jordan said, it's the profession that does make a difference everywhere. Then where those relationships, many universities, I can only speak for SMSU, having done a small stint in our placement office, we struggle at times to find a placement for teaching candidates, because a school district will say, no, our teachers are so overworked, which they are. We can't take any student teachers. We can't do that at this time, etc. If you're looking to do a program like this, reach out to the university, become a mentor school where you can work with the placement office at the university and have a collaboration where we know that, you know what, I can call up Worthington because I know they're going to take my student teachers. I know they're going to take my Education 101 students who only need X amount of hours in their placement. And then we always tell our candidate, it's like a job interview for 4 years. But, you're going to get into that rural community. You're going to get there. You're going to find how much you love it, because everybody's going to know you. You're going to walk back in and they're all going to say, hi, Christine, how are you? And you're going to go, oh my gosh, I was only here for 2 days and they still remember who I am. So it's developing that relationship with a placement office, because we struggle to find placements in rural communities for our candidates. And so if you're looking at starting a program like this, I would highly encourage you to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, what can we do to work together so you can place multiple candidates with us? And then in turn, we can support them. We can look at a similar type of program. That for me would be one of the big keys that would benefit both rural communities and colleges and universities that have a teacher education program.
All right, thank you, Christine. Okay, so that concludes. Thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your wisdom and insights and experiences. We are next going to pivot to our two discussants. So Alyssa, I will hand that off to you to tee that up for us.
Excellent. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Brad, for facilitating that conversation. I want to pass it over to our two discussants now, who will each have a few minutes to share some comments. As they do so, I encourage all of the participants to enter any questions you have into the Q&A tool so we can get those ready for the Q&A segment of this webinar. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff to get started, and then we will pass it over to Bob after that. Take it away, Jeff.
Well, Bob and I met, and we're going to twist it around, and Bob's going to start this, and then we're going to go back and forth a little bit. So
sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. So not just Jordan and Elizabeth can get away with this, we can get away with it too. Anyhow, the teacher shortage has moved from a prediction to a reality. The shortage was forecasted before COVID hit, and COVID just exemplified the problem. The problem is multifaceted and will take many fronts to solve the problem. We need to do our part in promoting the profession. One way we talked about today, right? Grow your own. You can have classes in high school, give students a look into teaching, promote teaching that way. You can somehow get different adults into the program, make it easier for adults to enter our field. There are more things to consider as well. I liked what Elizabeth and Christine talked about with student teaching. Imagine almost every field out there, an internship is paid. Why is teaching not paid? Why is student teaching not paid? Okay. One thing I sent to Bree, and Bree, I don't know if you can put it in the chat or not, the article that I was reading here recently. Gary Funk from Rural Schools Collaborative published an op-ed on the teacher shortage. He talked about the importance of grow your own, but he also argues that maybe we need to go back to the days of having normal schools in rural communities. That might help our situation. If you remember, normal schools were established specifically to train teachers, and there was literally hundreds of them in rural America. Is that the way to go? I don't know, but at least it would put some focus on education. And I see that Bree put it in there, so thank you. If you want an interesting article, that's one. Jeff, I think you had a couple of ideas there too.
Yes, exactly. We, there's had an opportunity to take a look at Tennessee's model right now. They're doing something with apprenticeships per se, where you could, we all have them in our school districts. We have teachers or four-year degree people that are subbing that said, I'm really interested in going into the education profession, but I'm not sure I want to spend 2 more years or a year and then student teaching to complete the process. And in Tennessee, they have something where it's an apprenticeship, and it's a 1-year apprenticeship, and you're doing your work right there in the school with the support of higher education and taking courses at the same time. So it's a big collaborative work. They have a process where teachers or students that are interested in going into education, that may have done something like a Grow Your Own, or Educators Rising. They've had a lot of background. There's a 3-year apprenticeship program. We have apprenticeships right now with plumbing, with electrical. You got to be journeyman and so on and so forth. And we need to take advantage of all these options out there. There isn't a one size that fits all for everybody, and we need to note that. That's one area there. I'm going to digress just a little bit, Bob, in this, and I'm going to go this direction only because I think it's been exemplified very well already. But about in November, Joe Knapp was on Wisconsin Eye, and he's the director of forward analysis, and he noted in 2004, by 2015, we would see a workforce flatten and continue to decline. So we knew this was happening. We've had known this for 15 to 20 years. We also noted that between 2010 and 2020, our 25 to 60-year-old workforce only increased by 9,000 in Wisconsin. And if this continues for the next decade, the 25 to 60-year-old workforce will decline by 129,000. This is not something new, it's something there. And so we need to have a number of either recruitments or migrants from Minnesota. No kidding, I'm joking on that. No, we need to keep our own, come on over. But, you know, when you take a really good look at it, we got to look at what Tony Robbins says. When your should becomes a must. This isn't we should do something. This is a must. We must do something. And his analogy was, if you're going to, I don't want to bring war into it, but you're going to take an island, he said, well, burn all the boats. He goes, now your should becomes a must and you have to take the island. That's all you have left. We are sort of in that situation right now where it is a must that we have upstream plans, and we have current adult plans, and we're working with the higher education, and we're working with our CSAs and our technical colleges, creating a systems approach that actually works for our rural areas. And each one's different. You may have some that are close to urban and suburban that are working with needing, you know, the funding is challenged, where we can't pay as much. We're really rural, so why do we come? And I think it was brought up a couple times. I don't have an Uber that's going to come and bring me some food. I've got to be able to. What entices me to be there? So I digress just a little bit, but yeah, we need to make sure this is a must do across the board, not a should do.
Yeah, and you know, there's other things that we can be looking at. I know in Minnesota, we are fighting hard for flexibility in licensure. I remember when I first got into teaching, I was teaching science. There was an all science license at one time. Now there's separate license. You have to have physical, life science, earth science, that type of thing. How can we make it so that especially in small rural schools where you can get a full-time employee instead of, me teaching just physical science for a section and then, oops, I got to find something else to do. That's a big deal. The other thing that we feel is very important is that, we have to remain competitive to entice students into education, right? We can talk about TRA and the benefit of having a pension, right? But I don't think that attracts kids. It will keep teachers in the field, but I don't know that it keeps or attracts students. Salary would, but we also have to talk about our other benefits and not be shy about it. Hey, how about time? Time is a big deal in life, and teachers get time. You get, holidays and summers and that type of. We can't be ashamed of that. That is a benefit of our profession right now. It may change in the future, but right now it is a benefit. I can give you a personal story. My son is a nurse. I can't have Christmas on the 25th because he's always working. It's expected that they are going to work. We are not expected to work at that point in time. So I also like what Jordan said. I think that we have to keep the integrity of the profession, and it needs to be exemplified. We need to be the ones who lead by example by defending how good the profession is. We need to embrace students and other adults interested in education and take them under our wings. We need to sound loudly how great the profession is. Being negative about our profession only continues to make the problem of the teaching shortage worse. I'll give you one more example. MREA puts on a conference in November. We decided we're going to invite all the student teachers from our universities that are members. So there's 7 universities. And we were just going to give them a professional development experience in rural Minnesota. 20 kids sitting at a table. I asked the question, how many of you in your student teaching, how many of you had a teacher come up to you and say, hey, get out of this profession. It is a bad profession. Find something else to do before it's too late. Every hand went up. To me, that was a sad statement. And I think that that's something that we need to reflect on. And I know that's where Jordan was going with his statement as well. We are our own worst enemies sometimes on trying to promote our profession. And, to solve the teacher shortage, we just can't point fingers and hope that things get done. We need to lobby our legislators to increase funding and opportunities for schools. At the local level, we can promote our profession in many ways that, like that we talked about today. Building a grow your own program in your region can be one of the pieces of the puzzle. Jeff, I think you had some more to say.
Well, I'm going to dovetail a little bit on what Jordan said. Teaching's tough. Teaching's frustrating at times. Teaching is challenging. It's not easy. And if it ever was, everybody be there doing it because, but when the teachers need to know they do lead by example, and when that frustration comes into play, be positive when you're talking about your profession. It's absolutely critical that we do that. You were talking about just looking at that time aspect, Bob, too. I've always shied away. Oh, don't say we have summers. No, that sounds bad. Don't do that. Well, I was at a Educators Rising seminar on a panel with teachers, administrators, and DPI was there. And we had 70 students, or no, almost 100 students in the room talking. And the teacher raised her hand and said, what are the benefits? And she finally said, I got to tell you, I'm not going to tell you differently. I work during the summer, but I do have my summer. So don't think it's not a positive. It is a positive. So I thought it was coming directly from, teachers to say, yeah, let's look at those benefits that you have. You do have them. You can work, but you could also have a little more time, as Bob said too. And I think that's important. We got to keep promoting our profession a lot better than what we had. And when Bob told me that message of saying everybody raise their hand, it just made me drop my jaw and go, oh my gosh, we got to quit doing that. We do a great job creating career tech centers. I mean, I've been through many of them. I love them. Where's our career tech center? We should have one. We're in education. We should have a pipeline that we're driving from middle school, elementary, middle school to high school, and all the way forward. And we need to do that. Why weren't we doing that? Because, as Jordan said, I was there. I was there when we had 100 applicants. I was there when we had 50 applicants. I've been there when we've had 0 apply. And then who could do this job? That's a challenge, and we're in that challenge. So let's keep working on growing your own. And we do have to make sure we're talking to our legislators quite heavily, because the funding sources are there. They're there. We need to make sure we're talking to our legislators too about how we need to build and grow our own, and not always with why do I lose again? But having a grant. Grants are great, but let's have a systems approach that has some flexible money that's going to allow us to do something. Grants get us started, and then we're going to figure out and scramble how we're really going to accomplish this in the end when we really need that money in the first place across the board. So there you go. That's a little bit more. I'm sure we could talk for another half hour about all those fun things. So I'll stop there and send it over to Bob or whoever's next.
Nope, I'm done. Maybe back to Carl. Or Brad, I'm sorry.
I'll jump in here, and thank you so much for providing your comments. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Bob and Jeff. And now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of this webinar. So participants, if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A function on Zoom. And I do have a couple of questions already that I'll pose to our panelists and discussants, and we can start there. So Liz, I know you mentioned this briefly, and Jeff, you were just talking about this, but one of the questions is, how can state education agencies and legislatures be of greater support to these efforts? So maybe Christine, I'll throw it to you in case you have ideas, and then we can sort of pass around and see who else would like to chime in here.
Well, I have to be honest with you. When you said Liz, I'm going to hand it to you. So would you tell me? I mean, I was listening, but I wasn't like focused because you went Liz, and I'm like, okay, I can wait. So tell me
Well, I
again.
can go over to Liz too, but essentially the question is just, how can state education agencies or legislatures be of greater support to these efforts?
Sure. State legislatures, if you're on and you're listening, I think we've already alluded to it. We have candidates who in today's society are going into debt, student teaching, because they are not able to earn a wage, if you will. I have a daughter who is going into agriculture, is going to be in agronomy. During her internship, she earned $18 an hour for a summer, which paid for her next semester. Thank you. Mom and dad didn't have to pay for it. But we don't have that in education. They live on macaroni and cheese, or like I did, macaroni and cheese and whatever else I can buy for $4 back then in the olden 1980s, 90s. You know, so we need support from the legislator. We need support for all of our students. I had an email come in while Bob and Jeff were talking, you know, about reaching the needs of our BIPOC population. I personally use the word diversity because that's what my candidates have said and asked me to use versus BIPOC. But that's what I'm talking about, is our BIPOC population. How do we reach the needs of these students and all students? Because just because you want to be a teacher, we need to make sure that we have a road for all candidates to get there from our legislature and support. Liz, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, Liz, anything to add?
I would agree with what Christine is saying. I think we need to look at education and how we support our teachers coming into the field differently. And this just builds on what Jordan and Bob and Jeff have said too. It's the idea of that in every other profession, we are willing to pay for internships. And I think, you know, I student taught, my college roommate had an internship. She had, you know, she was able to be paid for that. And at that point, it was only like $2,500, but that made the difference for her, not having to also try to hold down a part-time job, pay tuition, and then student teach. The internship allowed her to have more flexibility in her financial life so that she could devote more time to her internship. And I think that we need to be able to address that. I don't know of any district that probably wouldn't be willing to pay interns, but we don't have rural districts in particular, and urban districts, I would assume too. Our budgets are tight. And the other piece of this, and I haven't said it, but you know, we're evaluated a lot on what our test scores are. And when you bring in a student teacher, you are turning over your classes, your kids, to a new teacher. And while they're going to get quality education, that teacher of record is relying on that person coming in to be quality and to be able to take over their classroom and teach their kids. Well, how can we help make sure that when we become, as Christine said, a mentor district, we are not dinged on the student achievement piece when we are trying to also train people for the profession? I don't necessarily see it causing huge point drops or anything like that in our achievement, but it is a real concern. And I've had some teachers say, I'd love to take a student teacher, but I'm not willing to risk how I'm measured or how my kids are measured by that test score. So we've created a system sometimes that makes it difficult for people who are teaching and who would love to mentor in the profession to let go of some of their classrooms because they're worried about that piece.
Thank you, Liz. Jordan, Jeff, Bob, would you like to add anything here?
I want to jump in real quick on, yeah, I guess, we talk about the funding system. It's a little bit challenging in Wisconsin where if your revenue limits are at a certain level, and your neighboring district is at a higher level, your funding source is a little bit different. And sometimes you're able to pay more, and teachers are more apt to look a lot easier without the stability that we have had way back when, probably prior to Act 10 with 2011. Some positive merits, some negative merits, but one of the things when students or teachers can move real easily, and you alluded to it, Liz, where stability is better. And but if I'm moving around, then you're not creating that stability, and it's nice to have. So we can do that. I know that I just had a board meeting yesterday, and we are forming a committee within that board with a few superintendents and CISA administrators that want to figure out how we can connect the dots, because there are so many great things happening between Educators Rising, which I have some great data on that, and what you're doing, and I'm talking about Wisconsin, what Jordan and Liz doing there, and other people are doing, and then with higher ed and the technical colleges and the dual credits, a lot of great things are happening, but is there a systematic approach to it? And we decided that we're going to start forming a little committee to start taking a look at that to help support our rural schools as much as possible. But I think some funding would always be good to be looked at, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jeff. We've had another couple questions entered into the Q&A and only have a few more minutes. So I'm going to move on for now. The next question is really focused on the environments that we create for these teacher candidates. So the person wrote, how can teacher education programs help support school districts in being supportive of teacher candidates who are less traditionally diverse? For example, teachers with unconventionally dyed hair, visible tattoos, those who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. We have a goal of having these students in our programs and all have rural experience, yet some of them, often very strong future teachers, don't always have a positive experience in these rural districts. So what thoughts do you have on how we can create more positive experiences for these teacher candidates? And with that, maybe I'll start with Liz or Jordan first this time.
Well, I guess I'll just quickly speak to it. I think this one would be a good one for Christine to talk about with her experience. But I mean, that certainly what you just read, unfortunately, to me is not overly shocking. And I do think that that's part of the challenge, once again, to rural communities being able to bring back their best and their brightest, irregardless of what their preferences are, how they look and things like that. And I think that's part of the rural challenge, if you will, is they maybe people don't always feel like they're most inclusive communities in the world. So I mean, what we do in our rural community is to try to positively impact the experience that our students and our staff have right now, and to provide educational opportunities. I mean, a clear example is the Dane County Equity Consortium that we're a member of, and that we try to have a social justice group of our own students here at Wisconsin Heights, despite the fact that we're a small rural district, is to kind of expose our students and help them understand why this is important. So I think it starts locally, but then certainly is something that higher ed can assist with as well.
Thank you, Jordan. Liz, do you want to chime in
Yeah,
just briefly first,
say,
and then Christine?
Yeah, I would say also, like, in my school at least, we try to be pretty like the dress code is not that conservative dress code that it used to be. And we're pretty liberal with our dress code. And I think our our kids feel comfortable enough expressing themselves and being themselves. And we have tried to grow a culture of not just tolerance, but acceptance that people get to express themselves different ways. And as long as you're dressed somewhat appropriate, well, I won't go into it, but you cover certain things, you're fine. So I think what we're trying to do is show that, like, yeah, you can pretty much express yourself. And I would hope that my staff who work for me would say that they feel comfortable in that too. Because I think when I look at, I was just thinking about who in my staff do I have that maybe looks a little bit not traditionally teacherish. And I think I have several staff members who they dress the way they want and they wear their hair the way they want. They have visible tattoos and they are authentic people. And I think that's the big piece, is if you're an authentic teacher, kids will come to you and accept you more so than someone who's maybe dressed very conservatively and professionally, but doesn't seem authentic at all.
Thank you. Christine?
Well, I would just piggyback on that is, we have to have an understanding that we accept all people for who they are and what they bring to the table. The only, working in the placement office, the one thing I can think of in relationship to that question when it said about piercings and things, we did have to tell a candidate once that they had a nose piercing, the hoop right around here, they were going into a particular classroom where working with a particular candidate's students, and we were worried about, we asked them to take that out because a safety issue for them. They were going into, I'm not talking about now the program that I'm here to talk about. I was working in the placement office, and just as a, they were going into work in a special education room, and just because of everything that was the level of they were in, it was a safety issue for them. We didn't want them to get hurt in that aspect. But as for tattoos and colored hair and etc., I have no problem, with that. And I think, and that's what I encourage our students is, I want you to be who you are, because if you're trying to be somebody else, you're going to focus more on that and less on teaching. And I want you to focus on teaching. I want you to be your true self. So then it's coming to our rural communities as a university supervisor in that role, and talking with them and saying, hey, way back when in the 70s, when you wore those high heel boots to your knees and those short skirts, that was acceptable. This isn't much different with pink hair and tattoos on my arms, so going that, it's just, it's changed. But like Liz said, making sure everything's covered is always a good idea. So.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I do want to raise that there is a comment in the Q&A really highlighting this issue around using funds for grow your own programs for specifically tier 1 and tier 2 teachers, and restrictions around that, and some of the challenges around that. So I want to highlight that really briefly, and then just thank all of our panelists and our discussants and all of the Region 10 Comprehensive Center staff for facilitating this webinar today. We hope all the participants enjoyed it. And if you wouldn't mind, all of our participants, please respond to the 1-question survey that's in the chat. With that, thank you very much for joining us today.